Greetings, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the first World Food Prize Foundation's Digital Dialogue of 2021. We bring you several World Food Prize laureates and key experts to reflect on the open letter of our 24 laureates on actions needed to build back better in global food systems. As you may know, our mission here at the World Food Prize Foundation is elevating innovation and inspiring action to sustainably increase the quality, quantity, and availability of food for all. Today is a really special day at the Foundation as we celebrate the 107th birthday of our founder, Dr. Norman Borlaug. We are honored to carry forward his legacy and advance his mission to feed the world. During our discussion today, we're going to be collecting questions from the audience through the form that you can see below you, below the live stream. It's www.worldfoodprize.org/live. So share your questions, and even if we can't answer them today, we promise to circulate them following the dialogue to keep the discussion going. Throughout today's dialogue, we want you to share your thoughts on social media and afterwards. So use our hashtags WFP Laureates for Action, the number 4, or hashtag digital dialogue. Today, we're so pleased to welcome a panel of distinguished speakers from around the world and 650 registrants. They're coming from academia and research, nonprofit organizations, private sector companies, small and large, governments, multilateral organizations, and grassroots organizations also from around the world. On February 23rd, 2021, 24 World Food Prize laureates mobilized in a call for action to the Biden-Harris administration. They want to see continued action and investment to transform global food systems, working towards a healthier, more sustainable future and ending hunger. You can read this letter by clicking the button also on your video screen or at worldfoodprize.org/live. So today we have 4 laureates and 2 special guests joining us. I'm not going to go through all of their biographies in depth. I'll say a little bit about each one as I introduce them, but look at their in-depth bios and the tremendous experience they're bringing on the button down below. So let me introduce each of our speakers today. First, Dr. Lawrence Haddad. Lawrence is Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition and our 2018 laureate, one of them, who brought the issue of nutrition to the forefront with both economic and medical research to make child nutrition an urgent priority. And he also led the development of this open letter. We also have Reverend David Beckmann. David is President of Emeritus of Bread for the World. He's our 2010 laureate, one of them who led advocacy campaigns to drive elected officials and others to change poverty and hunger policies and programs also around the world. Next, Dr. Jan Lowe. Jan is Principal Scientist for the International Potato Center, SIP, in Kenya, based out of Kenya. She's our 2016, one of our 4 2016 laureates, and Dr. Lowe led the development of high-yielding varieties of sweet potato that flourish even in variable climatic conditions. Dr. Gebisa Ejeta. Dr. Ejeta is Director of the Purdue Center for Global Food Security and our 2009 laureate. Dr. Ejeta also is the Chair of the World Food Prize Selection Committee. Next, we have Dr. Robert Bertram. Rob is Chief Scientist for USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. Rob is a key advisor advancing research, technology, and implementation of Feed the Future. And last, we have Claudia Sadoff. Dr. Sadoff is an executive team management member for the CGIAR system organization. She's working hard through research agendas and other activities, improving the impact of the many critical CGIAR systems. Throughout today's sessions, we are going to be featuring clips of the special messages that we've circulated. 3 of our esteemed laureates recorded messages and their thinking for all of you. So you can watch their full remarks, clicking the button below after our session today. But throughout the day, we'll just feature a little bit of their message. Again, worldfoodprize.org/live. So let's get started. Our discussion today flows from the Laureates 2021 open letter. It was launched last month, expanding today on the theme to build forward better. Our laureates, our speakers today, are calling for deliberate commitment, investment, and action that's essential to achieving the 2030 SDGs and agenda, and to eliminating hunger in the decade of action. So the open letter's been public for about a month now, and we've received immense news coverage. You can see actually all of the news coverage in active links on our website, over 250 outlets from around the world, including the Washington Post, AP Wire, amplifying this message. Social media captured the message to the Biden administration, calling to act on ending hunger now. So speakers, as we proceed today, please offer any comments you have about how you think this letter has been received so far. We're going to start with you, Lawrence. You helped launch the idea of this open letter. Why is it so important to take action at this time? And really, how can the U.S. be catalytic in that action?
Thank you, Barbara. I've got to be honest, I'm worried. Yesterday, a UN report came out saying we're on the doorstep of famine in at least 20 countries. And a few weeks before that, FAO reported that global food prices had risen by 20% in the last 10 months. And we knew hunger was rising before COVID, but now we know it's likely to go up even further. And who knows, this may well lead to civil unrest. And COVID also threatens child malnutrition. We know that from estimates coming out in Nature Food next month, that 10 years of progress in reducing wasting are likely to be wiped out in the next 2 years if we don't act now and act decisively. A backdrop against this is 3 billion people who can't afford healthy diets, climate targets not being met at the current rates of progress, biodiversity being lost at record rates, obesity rising everywhere. And we know inequality will rise because of COVID. And yet, this is the crazy part. We've never known more about how to change this, and we've never had more resources to do it. So what do we do? Well, our current food systems got us here, and that is where we need to look for change. They need to be transformed, not a revamp, not a reboot, but a transformation. And what an opportunity that presents. That's because food systems are a veritable one-stop shop for addressing these threats to people, prosperity, and planet. And that was the message embedded in the open letter from the laureates in their call to action. And it will be the message from the UN Food System Summit later this year. So how much will this action cost? And that's, of course, a good question and an important question. And estimates vary, but they're all around $100 billion per year for the next 10 years. So is that a lot of money? Yeah, it's a lot of money, but let's put it in context. That's half of the US COVID relief bill that was just passed. And we also have to ask the question, what's the cost of action set against the cost of inaction? How much will it cost if we do not act now? Much, much more. In the nutrition space, the economists tell us the ratio is 16 to 1. So cutting domestic and international finance to food system transformation and hunger and malnutrition and climate is the wrong thing to do, and will place a set of really festering problems on the backs of the youngest and the most vulnerable. And those who've benefited the most or suffered the least, what do? Well, they have a responsibility to lead the way. Those who've been lucky enough to work at home in well-paid employment, like us on this panel and many of our listeners, we've actually saved money, and online retailers and the tech industry have seen record profits. Set that against increasing poverty and over half of all Africans losing their jobs in 2020, well, something's not right with that picture. But make no mistake, we can fix this. Food system transformation can fix this, but we have to do it together. Governments, businesses, civil society, development agencies, and yes, researchers. It's too big for anybody to do it alone. COVID reminds us how fundamental social interactions are to our human well-being, but it also reminds us how fundamental cooperation is to human advancement. So let's take these lessons, and as you said, Barbara, let's build forward better. And we can achieve great things in the next 10 years. Transforming our food systems is the smart thing to do, and it is surely the moral thing to do as well. Thank you, Barbara. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. So transforming food systems, we're going to talk about action areas, a variety of them to get to that transformation. Jan, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think Lawrence has really described very well the urgent issues that need to be addressed. So I want to focus more on why we're doing this, for the potential for the high return if the United States also takes a catalytic action for youth in this area. And just to focus on sub-Saharan Africa, 70% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa is under 30 years of age. And it is a group that has been particularly hard hit by the economic and both economically and mentally by the economic downturn due to COVID. In the recent past, many bemoaned the lack of youth interest in agriculture and nutrition, but certainly in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa and in the US, that has changed dramatically in the past few years. We are seeing an increasing number of youth that are fully engaged in the digital revolution in agriculture, interested in producing food and consuming healthier foods more sustainably, and venturing into agro-processing. And to succeed, youth need the skill base and enabling environment to put their innovative ideas to work. Through its outstanding land grant system, innovation labs, support to research entities like the One CGIAR and the Feed the Future initiatives, I think the United States can truly be a catalyst supporting engaged youth to drive this transformational change in food systems that we have been calling for.
Thank you so much, Jan. Let's turn to you, Gebisa. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this.
I have some. Much of what I hear is an affirmation of the message and intent of the letter that the laureates put out. Recognition that the world faces many challenges with all the abundance of knowledge, the resources that we have, the poverty, hunger, and malnutrition continue to be on the rise. Recognition that the global food system is distorted and needs an alignment, and that the world may need to align under shared purpose because there is so much at stake, and badly needed is global leadership. A renewal of US leadership is expected and asked for. Based on precedent, as nearly 12 years ago in 2009, President Obama faced two huge challenges, the global financial crisis and the global food crisis. He set out to address both of them. Just in his first visit overseas at L'Aquila, he mobilized the G8 summit to pledge over $10 billion at that time. And today, nearly only 12 years behind, President Biden now faces even greater challenges, challenge of climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the global food system that the world is asking for to be readjusted and realigned. Thank you.
Thank you, Gebisa. So we're hearing one-stop shop. That's what food systems offer. The cost of inaction is way more than the cost of action now. And youth in Africa, how the US can be catalytic, and US investment in Africa can be catalytic for the 70% of young people there. The distorted food system being transformed 12 years later, taking up the mantle that President Obama took up at the start of his tenure. This is a huge challenge everyone is facing. Claudia, you have some thoughts further, I think.
Sure. Thank you, Barbara. Let me just say that I think it's fabulous how this open letter has really struck a chord. And I think it's struck a chord not only because of the incredibly distinguished signatories, but because it comes at a moment in time. As Lawrence was saying, hunger was rising for the first time in a very long time before COVID. And with this shared tragedy of COVID, and with the optimism of the UN Food Summit this year on the horizon, I really feel this is a moment where we're seeing tremendous focus. And the fact that the idea of ending hunger has what really grabbed the headlines is quite interesting in the US. I wonder how much of it might have to do with the images we've been flooded with this past year of Americans lining up at food banks, reminding us that hunger is unacceptable in today's world. It's unacceptable, it's unnecessary. What's also really exciting, though, is I think that what we've seen since the letter was published is a range of constituencies coming forward with their vision for food systems transformation, what food systems transformation can mean beyond hunger as well. We're seeing women's groups, we're seeing groups coming forward and talking about the role of food systems in the climate action space for adaptation and for mitigation. We're seeing a discussion that's connecting food systems to biodiversity conservation and the slowing of species loss. And that's really exciting. So this open letter, I feel, has been a tremendously important conversation starter and a great focus for us to start these broader discussions, build these broader partnerships that even go beyond hunger, that go beyond agriculture, to all the ways in which our food systems tie us all together. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you so much. Any other comments on this before we go to another prompting question?
I'd just like to say that, I mean, it just makes sense to pay attention to the interconnections between things. As Claudia said, or Lawrence, you know, that reversing the surge in hunger, moving back toward the end of hunger and malnutrition, that's just, it's got to be one of the basic goals of humankind. But it doesn't mean that nutrition programs are the only game in town. I mean, they've shown themselves to be very effective, but in the lives of people, agriculture is also important. It's livelihood. You need to develop agriculture in a way that includes nutritious foods, that's make the agricultural sustainable and resilient. That's also important for reducing hunger. So it's both and food is connected to a lot of the other things that humanity wants to do, the Sustainable Development Goals. So right now, getting people vaccinated is obviously really important. It's urgent, but nutrition should be part of that, because nutrition helps make the vaccines work. It strengthens the body's resilience. And then just as a practical matter, when the family goes to get their shots, you can give the kids a couple drops of vitamin A. So it's an example of paying attention to the interconnections to get more done.
Maybe I'll just build on that, Barbara, on David's comments, to say that we have some fairly recent 2019 study from the World Bank, Harvesting Prosperity, which showed that growth in the agricultural sector is up to 4 times more effective than other kinds of economic growth in raising people out of extreme poverty. And we know that the first thing people do when they come out of extreme poverty is start to improve and diversify their diets. And so it's a 2-pronged approach we need. We need the nutrition interventions. We need the affordability interventions by driving productivity gains and through inclusive growth, but we also need to grow incomes and job opportunities. And that's what agricultural growth does really well. It generates the demands for locally produced goods and services. Poor people, youth, women are especially well positioned to step into those opportunities. So this is really a win-win approach when we approach both the supply and the demand side of food systems.
And that's really what we heard so much of in the open letter. And I know reflected in the dialogue going on around the world, the multiple wins from investing in food systems now. We'll talk more about that. Appreciate you mentioning the growth in agriculture, the importance of addressing nutrition. This leads very well into our first video clip. I'd like to introduce Dr. Akin Adishina. He is our 2017 laureate. He's the president of the African Development Bank. He'll offer just a few short comments.
The poor must be provided with access to vaccines. The reality is, millions of people today face greater risks of dying from hunger than from the coronavirus pandemic. And that is why the African Development Bank rolled out a $378 million Feed Africa response to COVID-19 that we call FAREC for food and nutrition, which scaled up the provision of improved seeds and fertilizers and other planting materials in 21 countries to raise food production. Without food, medicines and vaccines do not work. Food and nutrition are the vaccines for hunger and malnutrition. Let us vaccinate the world against hunger and malnutrition with access to adequate and nutritious food for all.
Dr. Adishina really driving home the message that food and nutrition are the vaccines for hunger. Let's keep that in our minds and keep going. So an important aspect of cooperation for human advancement is collaborative action. And this is the focus of this group, Building Forward Better. How can our current efforts be realigned to move beyond the problems of the past and reach the ambitious and intersectional needs of the future? We want to focus on food systems and these multiple wins across hunger and malnutrition, climate change, environment, peace and security, the gains needed in nutrition, and the fact that it offers more jobs. Points already well made, but we're going to continue that conversation. David?
Yeah. Well, the letter's about U.S. leadership, and President Biden's most important leading foreign policy goal is to restore American leadership. And we have seen over and over again that how important American leadership is in sparking collaborative action. When President Bush launched PEPFAR, he put the world on track to reduce AIDS. When President Biden went to the G7 with a $3 billion commitment for agriculture, the G7 committed $22 billion. And I think the developing countries they shifted a lot more money into agriculture than all of the aid providing countries. I think the stage is set for a strong showing of US leadership to be announced at the UN meetings, the Food Summit and the General Assembly in September. As Jan said, the US is strong in food. We have a good record on food aid, agriculture, nutrition. And then it's important, I think it's really important that the US Congress on a bipartisan basis supports action against hunger and malnutrition. In the last 2 years, both houses of Congress passed global nutrition resolutions by big bipartisan majorities. And there's an effort right now, bipartisan leadership in both houses is preparing legislation that'll take those resolutions and translate it into binding legislation to support a global nutrition initiative from the US. And I want to say the people on this call, the people who attend this webinar are really important in building US leadership. And for the Americans, one thing we can do is talk to our own members of Congress about the importance of this. Just yesterday, Bread for the World put a new sample letter up on its website. So you can go to bread.org, go to the page that's called Write to Congress, and you can use a letter on nutrition as as a starter for your communication with your own members of Congress. If Congress is clearly supportive, it makes it much more likely that the president can provide leadership, because if it's money, he needs Congress to deliver on whatever commitment he makes.
Great advice, David. Individual action to support collective action. Appreciate the focus on the US. Rob, you want to build on that?
Yes, and I just want to say hats off to you, Barbara, and to all the laureates for the timing of this really critical clarion call in the letter. And I'm thrilled to see that there's already been a response received on behalf of Secretary of State Blinken. And I just want to quote a little bit from that, because I think it's so targeted and focused in responding to the call from the laureates. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to fighting food insecurity and malnutrition, advancing sustainable agriculture, and tackling climate change. So it connects those three great challenges. And then it goes on to say that it wants to ensure that countries have access to the best and most effective agricultural initiatives and innovations. This is a place where the United States is uniquely poised to lead through both its public, its private, even its civil society organizations. We have such a great alliance in this country that's ready to respond. And then also it underscores evidence and science-based solutions. So it's a wonderful response. I want to build on that one, say, coming out of COVID, we've seen the vulnerabilities. We've seen that the nutritionally important value chains, fruits, vegetables, animal source foods, these vegetables, these nutritionally important vegetables have been the most vulnerable because they're employment rich, they're human contact rich. So we've seen that those have been affected. We know, models tell us that by the end of next year, there'll be over 2.5 million additional stunted children. So this is now the time to build back better or build forward better. I like your riff on that theme. And I think we have to think about some of those same points of entry to make those nutritional foods more affordable. And in doing so, we'll generate more employment. We'll lower the price of them by increasing the productivity, reducing losses, making markets more efficient. And we've got great opportunities. We've got digital tools. These are information and market sensitive value chains and production systems. We've got new tools that connect rural areas to the demands of urban markets and cities and towns. And we can think about also innovations in finance to try to get beyond the short-term working capital limitations that we see in much of the food system in the developing world. And there's a lot of great innovation involving both the public and private sectors. And here's another space where USAID is involved. So there are many points of entry. And I think that's the critical thing, Barbara. Thinking, food systems are complex. It's a compelling concept, a complex construction. So we really need to be laser focused in how we're intervening. And I think your community, all the people on this webinar are going to be so critical to thinking through where our points of entry are that are going to drive down hunger, extreme poverty, and undernutrition.
Great, and you've mentioned a few of those already. So Lawrence, we're going to be turning to you. You may have your screen on speaker view instead of grid view, but
sorry about that.
That's okay. So what thoughts do you have also? Multiple wins, investments being made.
Thanks, Barbara. I mean, I agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said. I think it's easier to say we want multiple wins, obviously, than it is to actually get those wins. And Rob's quite right that the food systems are really complex. And I think the challenge is for us to see that as a multiple of opportunities. It's a bit like a Rubik's Cube. It's trying to find your way through a Rubik's Cube. I'm showing my age right now, but a Rubik's Cube has, the bad news is they're really difficult to solve. The good news is there are thousands and thousands of combinations and permutations that are possible. Give you one example. I was talking to somebody this morning from one of the African countries, one of the focal points for the Food System Summit, and they were telling me about vegetables. The country's investing a lot in vegetables. And I said, which vegetables? They said potatoes, onions, and tomatoes. So I said, what about dark green leafy vegetables, high in nutrients, great potential resale value or commercial value, great for the environment, great for biodiversity. And they said, well, we just don't have the research capacity to do that. It's really difficult to improve the productivity of vegetable seeds, and we don't have the capacity to do it. So given that it's going to take 10, 15, 20 years to get to that space, we're kind of disencouraged from doing it. And so change takes time is what I'm trying to say, and making the connections across multiple outcomes, it's not easy to add up the benefits to weigh those against the costs. So changing mindsets, changing food policy is really important to reinforce all of this.
And that's a long-term effort. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's long. It's a marathon. It's a sprint of marathons, or a marathon of sprints, whatever the expression is.
Both, maybe it's both.
Yeah, both, maybe.
Claudia, I wanted to come to you as well.
Thanks, Barbara. I think that this is a fantastic question, really focusing on the collaborative action that's needed for the realignment required to really aim toward these multiple wins. And Rob, it is wonderful to hear the administration's response to this letter, this recognition of the interconnectedness of our food systems to so many of the issues that are deeply prioritized right now. It's already sounding like a bit of a leadership response. So congratulations to the World Food Prize Foundation and the laureates whose letters are really sparking this interest. But I think it's, each one of the speakers has underscored the fact that these systemic challenges really do require this sort of realignment Barbara's question is asking about, the recognition that our 21st century challenges really can't be solved with the 20th century methods, piecemeal or by single discipline. If we really think about the big picture here and the interconnectedness, we cannot solve the climate challenge. We cannot slow species extinction. We cannot sustainably manage our water resources, our land and our ecosystems. We cannot do any of those things without transforming today's food systems. And if we want to achieve all of those things at once in Lawrence's Rubik's Cube, we need to build a web of partnerships across geographies, across levels, within agriculture and well beyond agriculture. And that's something that we need to position ourselves better for. At CGIAR anyway, we're beginning to build forward by realigning the way in which we work. We're realigning our global network of field-based research institutes into a much more integrated one CGIAR structure. We're weaving together our capabilities, our facilities into this more collaborative whole, which will help us adopt more of a systems approach to these intersectoral challenges and to continue to deliver critical agricultural science. We're terrifically proud of the 24 World Food Prize Laureates who are CGIAR alum. And we see their voice in this letter of change as something very powerful. But even with our own reforms aimed exactly as what you're talking about, part of what we're after here is to make us a better, more collaborative partner for research and development, because we recognize so fully that the challenges we face undeniably require this greater partnership and this greater ambition. We need to raise our sights in terms of what we ask of our food systems. We do believe, though, that together we will look forward to a next generation of World Food Prize Laureates and really try to address this next generation of more interconnected challenges that we all face. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks. It really points to such a convergence that we can see in this time. We have the Food Systems Summit. We have the CGIAR reorganizing. We have our other partners calling for action. The Chicago Council for Global Affairs has issued a major paper also calling for action to the Biden and Harris administration. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, also, Julie Howard has a letter out really demanding action in the same way. So one of our challenges is to figure out, how do you capitalize on this convergence of so much going on? Before we go to our next question, I want to give Gebisa and Jan a chance. Anything further you want to say on this?
It's an absolute.
Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, I think people are calling for this change to focus on nourishing the population and as well as the planet. And I think we start, by building that critical mass of influencers and learn to listen better, huh? But I completely agree with the call for strong supported research aligned to intervention efforts, because we need to assist governments with the information they need to get these so-called multiple wins. And at the country level, I've seen certainly in the nutrition movements, creating a focused unit established at a high level within government can have that ability to bring these diverse sectors to work together towards common goals, including what I would love to see, revising school curricula. So something as fundamental as good nutritional practice becomes a life skill. In the past, we've often underestimated the resources needed to build consensus between different interest groups, and it does take a lot of resources. So I think watching the food system summit preparation is a great example of what it takes to build that ownership and reach consensus for transformational change. And that should become more the norm and not the exception of how we reach out to build this influencer community.
Great, and great to have a specific recommendation in the use of these focused units. We should talk more about that. Gebisa, anything you want to add?
Just to add that, where the rubber meets the road is in developing countries engaging governments in host countries who are receiving, that are investing in agriculture, to bring back to Jan's earlier comment, engaging youth in agricultural enterprises has great opportunities. I think investment in that area, encouraging programs and government to pursue that, and then providing assistance to strengthen that would be a great investment and would probably pay dividends in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us back to the youth. You can't go for 2 minutes in these discussions without hearing about the investment in women and youth. And it's the decade of action for that, certainly. Lawrence, you have something?
Just very briefly on that, Barbara, and I completely agree with Jan and Ejeta on this. It's so important to invest in youth in agriculture, especially in Africa, I think. But it's, at the summit, we've been trying to develop ideas around that, and there's this challenge from going to these statements to things that are actually investable at scale. So all of us, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else, we make big statements, we have little projects, and we need things in between those two. And so just yesterday I was on a call with 15 African youth organizations in agriculture, and it was really encouraging to see them come together as a group and say, right, we're going to put our egos and logos aside, we're going to work together and create an investable proposition that is so compelling. Governments, we're going to basically test governments' statements, and we're going to test businesses' statements. If you think it's so important to invest in youth and agriculture in Africa, here's the 3 things we want you to invest in. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what you'll get from it. And we need more of that. We need more pulling together of actual organizations to create investable propositions that people can get behind. And that's not easy. It's unglamorous work, but it's really important.
Great.
And
one last thought.
I could add difficult political work, because one of the key constraints we see in sub-Saharan Africa for women and for youth, for example, is access to land. And in some of our countries, we have very low landholding availability. So this is one of the tough issues where, again, I think leadership shown by outside influences to stimulate change in some of the traditional practices that don't allow women to inherit land, or other practices that really encourage youth in access to these things, will be critical for moving forward and making those dreams a reality.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things we've talked a little bit about is nutrition and the importance of nutrition, the multiple win of nutrition, investing in food systems. Dr. Howdy Bleace is one of Jan's fellow laureates from 2016. He spent his entire career developing and marketing fortified food. He has an excellent special message that you can find on the website, but let's just hear a clip from Howdy right now.
To address malnutrition, we need a mix of all approaches. Short-run nutrition direct, such as supplementation and commercial fortification, and long-run nutrition smart interventions that treat the underlying causes. We need to bring in more funding under the overall nutrition umbrella. Although they are cost-efficient, sustainable, and resilient, a drawback to agricultural approaches are the long gestation periods. It takes many years, often decades, to have large impacts globally. As parents, we invest in our children's education over 20 years. Can policymakers and donors take the same long-term perspective with agriculture? The long-term payoffs are very high. It is a matter of finding leaders and champions for each individual approach and persevering.
Thank you to Howdy and his appeal to us to look at that 20-year horizon for policy investment. We heard from others. This is a compelling but complex problem, and it really takes time to change mindsets. So looking out over that longer term horizon is crucial, even though they're critical matters to address just today. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about investment. The letter details why U.S. policy and investment in international development must expand. Everybody's reflected on that already quite a bit. What will be the impact that we can expect to see from strong leadership and these financial commitments? And really, how should the U.S. leadership catalyze other countries' ability to commit funding to agriculture, food systems transformation? David, let's start with you.
Well, I did comment on this already. I think, President Biden is probably going to be making one of his first major foreign policy speeches in September at the General Assembly. The Food Summit is that same week, and he has a strong background on hunger, poverty issues. So I'm hoping and praying that he'll launch a presidential initiative to lead the world in reducing malnutrition and hunger.
Great. Well, I'm sure you're mobilizing for action behind the scenes and ahead of the scenes for exactly that.
All of us.
So, yes, and really everyone. So we'll be looking for more on a presidential initiative. Gebisa, do you have thoughts on this as well?
I do. I think that the legacy of U.S. investment for international development have been very strong, sustained, and widely acknowledged. I may add that U.S. investment in international development, contrary to public perception, has not been a handout. The U.S. investments in international development has been dispensed through a range of collaborative programs through U.S. universities, through national and international NGOs. Agriculture is the biggest industry in the world. The private sector is important. U.S. government works with the private sector, with the largest public research organization in the world, with the CGIAR, and with multilaterals. So traditionally, the world has looked to the U.S. not only for the investment, for its global leaderships at times of great challenges. This is such a time. Now, with President Biden committing to return to climate change negotiations in Paris, if he would also heed our call and commit to the UN Food Security Summit in September, it would show the world both agendas are important to the US, and it can count on US leadership next September so that these deliberations that come out of that would address collaborative engagements and commitments from all governments, including the governments of poor nations that would have to assert themselves and commit to self-reliance and participate, play their role, and then seek assistance where they need assistance because they couldn't commit it from their own budgets. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Gebisa. Rob, and then we can come to you, Lawrence.
Thanks, Barbara. And Gebisa has already said this so well, but I'll just take one piece of that and run with it. And that is in the letter from Secretary Blinken back to the laureates, we had the emphasis on science. And of course, as I said earlier, this is a very strong suit for the United States to be able to play. And we try to do this in multiple ways. We have our Feed the Future Innovation Labs, partnerships with almost 70 US universities. We have our public-private research partnerships with the private sector, companies like Corteva, for example, where we're doing really exciting things to leverage cutting-edge science and product development know-how into the situations that smallholder farmers face in the developing world, in food insecure regions in particular. And then, of course, we have our CGIAR partnerships with the European, Japanese, Canadian, many other partners around the world in both developed and developing regions. And all of these, at the end of the day, connect back to scientists on the ground in partner countries. And this is not teaching people to fish. It's not giving people a fish. It's working together to learn how to fish better in the waters that those people are in. And we know that the challenges of climate change, the challenges of pests and diseases moving more rapidly around the globe than ever before are posing more threats than ever. Now, I think the other piece of this that I see coming out of the one CGIAR changes that we're seeing, where all of these different development partners are going to work together more closely to deliver, is this is going to open up new opportunities for USDA, for NSF, for the UK Research Initiative, for the European Science Foundation, and many other advanced science bodies to leverage that cutting edge science into solving the problems of food insecurity and undernutrition and environmental degradation associated with a climate challenged world where there's great persisting food insecurity. So we're seeing this as already in genetics partnerships where we're looking at heat tolerance and drought tolerance. Jan Lowe's work around biofortified foods, other exciting things happening there that form a nutritional safety net. And this is also connecting with the ability to reduce risk, for example, to climate risk. So what we want to do, Barbara, at the end of the day is we want to increase productive potential and reduce risk, and therefore drive investment on farm and off, public and private. And we think that virtuous cycle can really help us build back and can help us simultaneously tackle this challenge of climate change, food insecurity, food systems, and environment and biodiversity conservation. And by doing this, the US comes out ahead. We've seen it. We've seen US farmers and ranchers gain by being ahead of the curve on pests and diseases. Some of the work that Dr. Ejeta has been in, the programs he's been associated with, have paid off handsomely for American farmers who see the benefit. And we know that our exports to these countries go up as we move from aid to trade. We've seen that over and over. So it's really, it's the smart thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, captivating description of bringing science and the tremendous science base that, is here in the US, but really it's worldwide, together with the policy making in collaborative partnerships, in joint projects, advancing for all is just such a powerful pathway forward. I know others want to comment. Lawrence?
I'm happy to cede my slot, Barbara.
Okay. So what else really in the investment in international development, what else do you see on the forefront and is needed? Claudia?
Thanks, Barbara. I think that this is such an important discussion to have. It's both really the long-term vision that Dr. Bleace was speaking about, but also immediately, we have less than 10 harvests to achieve the SDGs. And there is so much good evidence out there for why an investment in agriculture and food systems is a tremendously effective way to get us there. And we've heard some of the numbers already today, but just in this past year, we've had a couple of reports coming out that demonstrate just how great the impact is of investment in agriculture. There was, in the development space, there was a report from the SOAR Foundation and the Series 2030 reports. They both called for the doubling of public investment in agricultural research and development by national and international agencies between now and 2030 to help end hunger, to double smallholder farmer incomes. And we've heard a lot today just about how important, how pivotal these smallholder farmers are, as both in terms of poverty and in terms of hunger and food security. And also that same investment having an impact on protecting the climate. So the SOAR Foundation, and we heard, I think it was Lawrence who mentioned a 16-to-1 return on investment. The SOAR Foundation came out with a 10-to-1 return on investment from CG Investment in Research and Development. And importantly, they pointed out that the primary beneficiaries of these investments were poor farmers in developing countries. And this is, again, it's a source of a space of great poverty in many places, but also a source of tremendous dynamism and importance for food security. And we had been following the FAO's advice that investment in agriculture is more than 3 times as effective in reducing poverty. And now the World Bank has come out and said that's actually 4. So if we're serious about hunger and poverty, development assistance in food and agriculture is absolutely essential and a really outstanding investment. The returns would appeal to any investor, but specifically with regard to the US leadership. As Rob was mentioning, the CG has had the privilege of working with USAID and the range of partners that come together in the programs that Rob is involved in. And I just have to say how inspiring this work is. So, for example, we've been working with the Feed the Future program to improve the effectiveness of crop water management by targeted training for women, because their role as water managers is really very often overlooked. And information, we have seen information that has brought to irrigation groups or small farmers groups that's brought and trained primarily men, that information doesn't flow naturally in many cultures to women. You need these targeted trainings, and they make a huge difference. And that is what inclusion looks like. That is what gender equality action looks like in practice. And the US has been a leader and a tremendous partner in that. We've been a partner in the Feed the Future Innovation Labs that Rob was talking about. For example, supporting farmer-led irrigation. 95% of the farmed land in Africa is smallholder rain-fed agriculture. It is hard to imagine a more vulnerable group, and this is the group that's producing the food that is feeding Africa. So giving these farmers the tools to irrigate their crops, as climate change is making rainfall so unpredictable, the rain really is the way that most farmers will experience climate change in the coming years. Giving these farmers the tools to manage that, this is adaptation in action. This is food security in action. These are phenomenal programs that are life-saving, that are livelihood enhancing, and they're just some of the examples of the ways that certainly we have been working with the US and so many partners, from seeds from seed improvements to farming practice improvements, to the policy environments and the planetary boundaries that we have to take cognizance of as we put together our innovations. All of these also have, and this is so important, tremendous scaling potential, tremendous learning potential that we can scale out and scale up to leverage the impact that we need to have. So these, they may sound like abstract concepts, these investments, but they are on the ground actions that are really helping people every day. Thanks.
And we know amongst all the centers, there's so many practical on the ground projects that are proceeding in all of these areas. And it really takes at all levels, the work that you're talking about. Lawrence?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I couldn't resist, sorry. People like me, we talk a lot about threshold. We're standing on the threshold. We're at a fork in the road. We're at a crossroads. But honestly, I feel like now this is the moment. This 2021 is the moment. I feel like it's the best last chance we'll have before 2030 to make things happen. Why do I think that? Because of this COVID year. This COVID year makes the unimaginable suddenly seem imaginable. It's a year since the lockdowns in the UK, probably in the US as well. Who thought we'd have a vaccine? Who thought we'd have half the population of the UK vaccinated a year ago? It's extraordinary. We're in this summit, the Food Systems Summit, but also the COP, Climate Summit, and the Biodiversity Summit, and the Nutrition for Growth Summit. And we've got these fantastic reports that Claudia mentioned, the Sarah's report, which comes from the CG and Cornell University, laying out a pathway, an investment pathway that will get us from 690 million hungry people to less than 200 million people by 2030. That's not quite ending hunger, but less than 200 million is 2.5% of the population in 2030. It's pretty close. So we could, in theory, be sitting in 2030 and looking back at this moment in time and saying, this is when we began to bend the curve towards ending hunger. I think that's extraordinary, and it fills me with optimism, not only because we can end hunger, but a lot of the investments, as Claudia said, are critical for nourishing food, are critical for climate change, are critical for biodiversity, are critical for jobs. So we have the opportunity, $33 billion a year to end hunger. That is a fantastic price, and we should just, snap if someone offered that to us, we snap it out of their hands. But it takes leadership to make that happen. $33 billion is not a lot of money. We have to find it. Governments have to find it. Donors have to find it. Foundations, businesses, citizens, we've got to find it. And that's where the critical thing that is missing in many instances is leadership. And that's why the US is so important. Because if the US, I live outside the US, we all look to the US for leadership. What happens in the US resonates powerfully in the rest of the world, negatively and positively. So I think Rob used the term capitalist. The US is the ultimate capitalist for this. If the US says we can make this happen, it's not a guarantee it's going to happen. But my goodness, are we increasing the probability?
Thank you. Thank you for all of these comments. I have to say, this is really, the remarks that you're making, they're reflected in the letter as well. This is really why the Laureates letter came about, in these four major areas in call to action for U.S. leadership to end hunger, because of the policy role, the leadership role that can be played, the evidence-based investment that's needed, and that catalytic action. And really the USAID Feed the Future initiative, Rob, I'm coming right to you. Feed the Future initiative, and so many U.S. investments that are needed here domestically, as well as we do experience our own increases in hunger here in the U.S. dramatically. All of these areas are critical for action. And as you said, the unimaginable is now imaginable. Things have happened in the last year that no one would have been able to anticipate. So let's make food systems transformation one of those. Rob?
Thank you, Barbara. I just want to build a little bit on this and say that a thread that comes across the comments, I think, from all of us, is that this is about our partner countries in Asia, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, growing their own ability to manage and determine their futures, to have better options for themselves, for very importantly for their farmers. So it's a lot about working together to build capacity and provide solutions that are demand driven, and they give poor people, especially smallholder farmers, more and better options for reducing risk, increasing profit and productivity, and getting out of poverty, and supplying their urban and rural neighbors with affordable, quality, nutritious foods. Now, one other piece that I'd like to add as an American in this, and I've seen this, and I think Dr. Ejeta personifies this, is the incredibly important role of our country's science establishment, but also its higher education establishment as a very critical partner in that journey of countries towards a more sustainable future where populations are well fed and the environment is well managed and risks are limited. And I think that this source of partnership, and this can be through science and technology, it can also be through helping develop curricula, using digital tools that connect problem solvers in American communities with their counterparts in our partner countries across the developing world. These are huge strategic wins for the United States. Former Secretary Gates, I think, when he was also head of Texas A&M University, has a great vision for this in terms of the strategic importance of our engagement in ways that go well beyond just solving these problems, but really build lasting partnerships and promote democratic values, promote open dialogue, promote freedom of expression, and all the values that we know contribute to a sustainable, positive, healthy society.
Well, that leads very well into our next range of comments. Jan, do you have a last thought?
Yeah, just one quick last thought. I really agree with everything Rob has said, but I also want to point out another part of the food system where I think the U.S. can show policy leadership. And that is, the FAO worked very hard with a number of countries to come up with voluntary guidelines on how companies processing food should behave in terms of producing healthier foods. We all know that one reason the food system is broken is the overabundance of ultra-processed foods. And I would like the US to show and have leadership because so many of those companies are based here. We have the same problems in the United States. How can we emphasize and push the transformation of the processing food sector and the education of the world in terms of healthy eating practices and healthy manufacturing practices? I think if we don't do this, we are missing a leadership opportunity.
I'm so glad you brought that dimension in. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. So speaking of optimism and the work of dialogue and collaborative action, the UN Food Systems Summit is proceeding this year, as it has been mentioned many times. And another of our 2018 laureates, the other one, is Dr. David Nabarro. And he has a very compelling special message, but we'll just look at a quick clip of it right now.
I hope that stakeholders everywhere will use this opportunity to work with governments and identify decisions that need to be made now within local contexts to move towards sustainable and equitable food systems everywhere. The process will create a really exciting range of opportunities for stakeholders to make commitments about how they will work together to bring the pathways to life. This is an extraordinary opportunity for all world leaders. I very much hope, including the leadership of the United States of America, to declare how they are planning to refashion food systems and contribute to a global approach on food that tackles the needs of people everywhere, with a particular focus on those who are hardest to reach and most likely to be left behind.
Great message. David is one of the leaders of the UN Food Systems Summit and running the development of hundreds of digital dialogues of all kinds going on around the country in the run-up to the summit. So his call for refashioning food systems and focusing on a global approach is quite timely. So we're going to talk a little bit now about this year focusing on the transformation of food systems through this summit. How do some of you see this? And we've talked about it a lot, but let's build on the collaborative action demonstrated by the open letter to elevate food systems globally. What is needed? How do we foster more action, and particularly in the area of climate change? We also have COP26 coming, and in nutrition, where the Nutrition for Growth Summit will take place in December in Japan. So let's talk a little bit about all of these major meetings that are not just meetings. They are beyond adoption of principles and ideas. They are moving towards action and commitment to action and commitment to finance. So Jan, do you want to say, start off with just a few thoughts about this unusual time, I think, threshold that we might be in, as Lawrence said?
Exactly. Well, I think the pandemic combined with the extreme weather events experienced in 2020 has truly been a wake-up call globally within all segments of society about the weaknesses and the strengths of the global and the local food systems. If we look back in American history, it was the combined effect of the Depression and the droughts associated with the Dust Bowl years of the 1930s that drove farmers to adopt the more drought-tolerant hybrid maize varieties and ushered in the era of modern agriculture that we associate with Dr. Borlaug's efforts to combat hunger at scale. And as Lawrence was saying, I think now we're at a similar time when what we would say the phoenix can and must rise from the ashes. Fortunately, there's much broader consensus than even 5 years ago on the urgent need to address climate change. And of course, the Biden administration is really behind this and build more sustainable food systems that truly nourish the growing population. The scientific evidence is irrefutable that assuring that pregnant women and children under 2 years of age are well nourished is the foundation for building productive societies for the future. So coordinated leadership across all three of these summits, drawing on and consolidating the knowledge generated from each to inform future actions and build a global consensus is key. But I also think we need more efficient ways to link those interested in engaging in collaborative action to each other. And the United States could lead in spearheading such efforts, especially to bring, I think, the private sector, as Rob was saying, and the strong public sector partners together.
Great, thank you so much. Gebisa?
Yes. One of the messages also in the Laureate letters is that the global food system needs to transition towards equity, towards the resilience, towards nutrition and health and sustainability, but also acknowledges the importance of everyone involved in the entire food system, producers, processors, ranchers and growers, all would need to commit to play a pivotal role toward this transition. Collaborative action to support innovations in technologies, in financial incentives, in public policy are needed to support not only the transition, but to encourage new growth and development, particularly in developing countries, because one of the drivers that is constantly missing in developing countries is markets that respond to needs of the poor farmers, since markets that are sensitive to the needs of the farmers. And that's a point also where the youth can come in with new enterprises, with new perspective, with their sensitivity and acuity to technologies and to financial instruments and to digital instruments, where they could play a role to begin to bring in a new kind of farming with opportunities for building communities around them. While adequate food supply in the world is going to continue to be needed, because growth, we're not talking about the rich feeding the poor, but poor countries need to build their own capacity to feed themselves, as well as create opportunities for growth in their own communities. So as they do that, the poor and rich countries will need to be sensitive to sustainably produce high quality, nutrient-dense foods that are accessible and affordable by all. And I'm hoping that at the UN Food Summit, particularly with youth involved and engaged, food systems around the world are likely to be challenged and asked to begin to rethink their strategies to align with the Sustainable Development goals as well as the Paris Agreement on climate change. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Gebisa. Really, to put forward all of the complexity of what needs to happen. That's really, it's crucial. Let's see, Claudia, do you have a few other comments, and then we'll open it up?
Great, thank you, Barbara. You know, like Lawrence, it's almost, it feels almost trite to say that this is a moment in time, but this is a milestone year with the Food Systems Summit, giving us this opportunity as a global community to really reimagine our food systems, to ask more of the food systems, as we've been saying, not just to end hunger, but to provide affordable, accessible, healthful diets, to reimagine that our food systems can intentionally promote gender equality, that our food systems can be realigned toward climate solutions by enhancing resilience to climate change and shocks, and by leveraging the potential for food systems to act as carbon sinks. And we can also create food systems that really respect our ecosystems and protect our biodiversity better by minimizing land conversion and promoting more nature positive practices. All of these opportunities that we have at the UN Food Systems Summit, but across those other dialogue spaces. And this is what's really important. We all know this, that we need to be speaking not among ourselves, but we need to speak across disciplines and across issue areas. And this year happens to be the confluence of so many of those opportunities. Nutrition Summit, Climate COP, we've all been waiting for because it's been delayed, and the US re-entering that space, strong and proud. And the Convention on Biodiversity Conservation, the COP in Kunming coming up this year. This year, all of these spaces in which food systems can make such a difference are having very high profile events. So can we create the space in all of those COPs for food systems to be highlighted in those global dialogues? The Biden-Harris administration could clearly help in creating that space, to position food systems across all of these platforms and really weave these thoughts through our solution spaces. And if the message that we heard today from Secretary of State Blinken's office around so clearly speaking to the centrality of food systems across the range of these urgent issues, if that message could be brought out by the US in these dialogues, I think that would go a very long way toward directing the energies and the ambitions around a food system transformation. And I very much like to believe that the letter put forward by the laureates and the foundation has been just a terrifically important conversation starter and a reminder and inspiration to all. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you for all of that. And honestly, it's a continuation of the conversation. The conversation has been happening, and it was definitely a great idea of the laureates to come together and try to unify that message. Lawrence, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, just very quickly on the issue of how to connect the different summits, because this is an extraordinary year. To me, it's obvious, and maybe I'm slightly biased, is that food is the common denominator in all of these, and getting food systems on the right path is the way to achieve all of these outcomes. And I think the leaders of each of these summits are going to try very hard and valiantly to connect. And I think they'll have some success in doing that. But to me, the real connectors are, it's something Dr. Ejeta said, youth are the way to fuse these summits together. We are supporting, again, and a whole host of other organizations are supporting youth leaders in the Food System Summit to make a youth pledge to say, what are they going to do and what do they want everyone else to do to transform food systems? And they said, we want to do this. We don't want you to interfere too much, and we don't want to be restricted just to the food summit. We want to play across all of these different summits. So I think youth are going to be very important, but the way we do it, we can't control it. We can only support it, and we just need to let it grow and fly and have wings.
That's really great to hear. I mean, the Food Systems Summit youth track and youth activities are tremendous, mobilizing all over the world, and they're going to be prominently featured. Our own youth programs are participating, and some of our own dialogues are being just easily crafted to be dialogues as part of the UN Food Systems Summit run-up. So others I know are doing this as well. So I'm so glad to also hear about the other summits and how all that's going. Maybe this is a chance for us to shift and move into closing remarks. I want to offer each of you all the opportunity to leave us with a last message and develop the line of thinking that's been brought together by the group, and we'll try to feature some of these remarks in the follow-up to the discussion. So, Rob, can we start with you and then maybe go to David?
Okay, great, Barbara. Well, as I was listening to everyone just now, it made me think about what we're hearing from the Biden-Harris administration. First, of course, is recovery from COVID, and we've talked about that as sort of a starting point for pivoting to the future. But the second thing is the whole issue of climate change. They are underscoring this, and this is global. This is domestically as well as globally, and in the context of international development. And very importantly, the third leg of that stool is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how do we define equity? I think that the compelling issue around nutrition, undernutrition, the extreme poverty that goes with it, but especially chronic child stunting, child wasting. These are, and especially child stunting because of its chronic nature. This is it's a human justice issue almost, because it's those children are being deprived of their full futures. Not only will they not achieve full stature, they will not achieve their full cognitive ability. So to me, that's at the heart of equity, to attend to that. So what do I think with that? I think we have a chance with those framings to develop a new consensus around SDG 2. We're almost 7 years into the SDGs. The SDGs were subscribed globally. A huge amount of thought went into it, and we've accepted, there's global acceptance. We know we have to do better, but I think we need to reimagine SDG 2 now with this climate lens fully engaged, with this equity lens fully engaged, so that we see that. And of course, it doesn't stand alone. It relates to the other SDGs, especially poverty and climate change. But we have those measures. And then beyond that, I'd like to say that I think, as Lawrence just intimated, the solving of these multiple challenges, climate change, conserving the environment and biodiversity globally, and food and agriculture and nutrition, those three things interact. They're inextricably linked. Success in one potentiates and actually determines success in the other. So we have to keep that lens together. And I think, as Jürgen Vogele, our CGIAR chair and World Bank lead on climate change, says, there are 3 F's with climate change: fuel, food, and footnotes. In other words, fuel and food are the big elephants in the room. So we have to, and this is where, the COP isn't quite there yet. So our community needs to build back there. And I'm excited about US leadership, as Jan and Lawrence and Claudia have said. So keeping those 3 things in view together and really rededicating ourselves to SDG 2.
Thank you. What a challenge to reinvent and reformulate SDG 2. So glad you put it forward. David, and then let's go to you after that, Jan. Just 1 minute, just 1 minute. We do want to end on time, but give everybody.
Okay, I think the dramatic progress that the world has made against hunger, poverty, and disease over the last 30 years is reason for hope. I'm a preacher. I think this is our loving God moving in history. It's sacred business. And we've suffered a terrible setback with COVID, but people everywhere are doing our best to get out of the pandemic and to address the surge in hunger and malnutrition that it's provoked. And we can now, what we can do is chart a path so that we address the urgent needs and at the same time put the world on track toward continued progress toward the end of hunger and malnutrition.
Great. Thank you, David. Jan, and then we'll come to you, Gebisa.
Yeah, two words come to me repeatedly: respect and commitment. This past year, we've seen what happens when we fail to respect Mother Nature. We also deeply respect, as Lawrence was pointing out, how global cooperation on an unprecedented scale produced vaccines in record time. Now what is called for is much harder: long-term commitment to truly transform food systems and invest in the behavioral change effort required to bring key players on board. I think it's critical to commit to invest in long-term research, such as breeding for climate resilient, more nutritious varieties that always must be adjusting to our ever-changing conditions. And full commitment, as people have pointed out, to the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals, for without tackling hunger, quality diets, and the rights of the vulnerable, we will not have peace, prosperity, and a livable environment to pass on to the next generation. So I would end with the words of Nelson Mandela: it always seems impossible until it's done. But I think this is where American persistence, scientific excellence, and values can really shine in a leadership role.
Thank you. This is terrific. I mean, so many great words of wisdom. Gebisa, and then we'll come to you, Claudia.
Okay. My final comments are that convergence of several grand challenges has rocked our global food security, water security, and nutrition security. Climate change and severe weather events have made agricultural operations even less productive and more uncertain in the tropical, in the developing countries in general. Threats from pests and diseases have increased. The swarms of migratory birds, pests such as locusts, birds, fall armyworms have become more frequent in parts of the world, particularly in the Rift Valley and the Horn of Africa area where I come from. In addition, now, COVID-19 pandemic brought havoc on the pool. And in the same area, again, conflicts are emerging, border tensions are strengthening, hunger and poverty and malnutrition are spreading in those areas. And that's a very scary picture to be looking at and looking towards in the next several months. The world would need to act. The massive food aid that may emerge notwithstanding, this call is for a new need, a new vision for a global food system. The new generation is calling for greater collaboration between knowledge centers, governments, and alliances with unified mission, but with greater emphasis on institutions that support people and programs, enterprises that support livelihoods and communities, collaborative actions that reaffirm and build the human spirit towards the goal of saving both lives and nourishing the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gebisa. Claudia, and we'll give you the last word, Lawrence.
Thank you, Barbara. My final thoughts are really very brief. Just to say that we are in an open moment, and we have a real opportunity now to align our efforts to realign our food systems. We can and we must make more of our food systems. We can make our food systems a more positive force in our efforts against global challenges, against hunger, against poverty, toward climate solutions, and toward greater equity and dignity for all people. We have so much that we can do together. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you. Lawrence?
Thanks, Barbara. I'm moved by these poignant and inspiring comments. My comment's quick. I'm a big believer in the power of one. We've talked a lot about the importance of collaboration, and that's true. Collaboration is key, but it's not an excuse for individuals not doing their bit. An example, we developed the food system dashboard to help policymakers make changes. We ran a competition and we found that the two winners of the users of the food system dashboard were teachers, one in Iowa, connected actually with the World Food Prize Foundation, and one in Kenya. And they were using the dashboard aimed at people like me. They had adapted it to teach kids between 6 and 11 years old about food, where it comes from, why it matters what you eat, why it matters where you grow it and how you grow it, and why it matters for environment, health, and well-being. I just found that totally inspirational. And my final thought, Barbara, is we can't transform food systems unless we're prepared to transform our own thinking. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I cannot thank this esteemed group enough for bringing your thoughts and wisdom together to us, for us. The best last chance is right before us. It's an open moment. We hear the importance of coordinated leadership, that a new farming model could be introduced and needs to be, because we only have 10 harvests left, really, until the SDGs. And we'll be looking for a presidential initiative, absolutely, to continue the momentum and guide leadership here in the US, and because we know it's catalytic around the world. So thank you all for your comments, for the time you spent preparing for and being here with us today. Your expertise and insights are going to be catalytic going forward. We'll do our best to amplify these messages going forward. I know they're already on social media all over. In the last few minutes, I'll just share a couple of updates with all of you from us. In early May, we are planning another virtual announcement of our next laureate. The 2021 World Food Prize Laureate will be announced and available. You can watch in the coming weeks for the date, which we expect to be early May, at worldfoodprize.org/2021 announcement. Our annual events in October will be in a hybrid format this year, with any luck. So last year, we expanded our audience tremendously using this virtual format, and we do not want to lose the access that the world had to all of the great speakers and thinkers that we try to bring forward in our dialogues. So we'll have a small in-person component probably, but we'll really share all of the information and all of the rich discussions around the world in a virtual format. So look also on our website to learn more about the theme, format, and registration. That'll be coming soon in the next couple of months. Today, on Dr. Norman Borlaug's birth celebration, I want to make just a short announcement and say that we are so pleased to welcome the newest member of our World Food Prize Council of Advisors. Julie Borlaug will be joining us. And it's quite fitting that today we would invite Norman Borlaug's granddaughter to carry forward his legacy in this way. So thanks to everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in May and throughout the year, and have a blessed day as you proceed with your own great benefit of our own food security and work towards food security for all. Thank you.